What's up, guys? We are here with the 15th shelf of my wrestling collection. Starting off with Cyber Sunday. This card was much better as far as one of these, they went from Taboo Tuesday to Cyber Sunday. It's a better card than the last one. But you got Umaga versus Kane. Texas Tornado tag team match was actually pretty good considering the teams that were in there. I was a big fan of Crime Time. Intercontinental title, Jeff Hardy and Carlito. Carlito very underrated. Wasn't very well utilized at that point, At least they were giving him the mid-card belt, but it seemed like after a while they didn't know what to do with him. Then we got DX versus Edge and Randy Orton. Great feud. Mickie James and Lita. Great to see an actual women's wrestling match. Ric Flair and Roddy Piper versus the Spirit Squad. Roddy Piper was way beyond his prime here. And then you had John Cena versus King Booker versus Big Show. I like the whole idea of all three champions fighting each other. Made for an interesting thing. Makes you, kind of like how they do with Survivor Series. They have the two champions face each other sometimes the last few years. So I like that twist. Then we have Survivor Series. Again, these pay-per-views, Survivor Series was not really a priority for them, it seemed, at this point. But you had Lita and Mickie James again. And then you had Chris Benoit versus Chavo Guerrero. Nice to see them using Chavo in a more elevated position instead of just the cruiserweights. Undertaker versus Mr. Kennedy in a First Blood match. This is before they gave up on Mr. Kennedy. King Booker versus Batista. The two of them work very well together. And here you go, traditional Survivor Series elimination match. Ric Flair, Dusty Rhodes, Ron Simmons, and Sergeant Slaughter versus the Spirit Squad. Really? And then you've got John Cena, Kane, Bobby Lashley, Sabu, and RVD versus Big Show, Test, MVP, Finlay, and Umaga. I mean, they were just thrown on there to be thrown on there. DX versus CM Punk versus Matt Hardy, Jeff Hardy, rated RKO. I mean, just such a random assortment of guys there. I miss like the 1990 Survivor Series when they'd have the ultimate match of survival at the end. That always made them, stakes during the matches instead of just randomly put together. Then we've got December to Dismember. A lot of people hated this pay-per-view. I thought it was okay. I thought they had some big names in the Elimination Chamber and were pushing some talent, with a third brand here. I mean, doesn't really show a lot of the matches on the back of this container, but, the Hardy Boys versus Eminem, I thought that was weird considering neither of them were even on this brand. So the only match that made sense was the Elimination Chamber as far as people who were actually on the show being from the ECW brand. And then we've got Armageddon. We've talked about how they gave up on Survivor Series. They also gave up on Armageddon at this point. Boogeyman versus The Miz. Gregory Helms versus Jimmy Wang Yang. And then you got Chris Benoit versus Chavo. Again, a great match. And then here you go. They're using Paul London and Brian Kendrick correctly versus William Regal and Dave Taylor. Wow, I didn't even know Dave Taylor was still wrestling at this point. Undertaker versus Mr. Kennedy. I don't know what a last ride match is. If you know what that is, at least I don't remember anyway. Comment down below. I'd love to remember what that was. In an Inferno match, Kane and MVP. They were pushing the younger talent there. I like that. But then you've got Batista and John Cena versus King Booker and Finlay. They had to bring John Cena over from the other brand to try to, carry this pay-per-view. Then we've got New Year's Revolution. This is when Triple H gets hurt. Mickie James versus Victoria. Another great wrestling match. Carlito versus Chris Masters. Great undercard match. Ric Flair and Kenny Dykstra, the only probably member of the Spirit Squad who besides Dolph Ziggler, who actually deserved to be there. Then, Jeff Hardy versus Johnny Nitro. Amazing match. Two of them pulled out all the stops. Worked very well together. Rated RKO and DX. Great match up until Triple H getting hurt. And then John Cena versus Umaga was actually very well done. They built Umaga up to be a big main event monster and then never used him properly after that. Then we've got the Royal Rumble, to where even if you don't like the stories going on at that point, you'll always enjoy the Royal Rumble. Bobby Lashley versus Test. Finally giving Test a push. Not the best on the mic, though. Batista versus Mr. Kennedy. Maybe it might have been a little too early to push Mr. Kennedy into the main event. And then John Cena versus Umaga again, which is great. And then you've, of course, got the Royal Rumble. Then we have No Way Out. This was officially, I believe, the end of the hard brand split here. At least I believe so. We got Paul London and Brian Kendrick versus Deuce and Domino. New tag team, obviously. Cruiserweight Open for the Cruiserweight title. And then you got all these random names. Chavo put back down in the Cruiserweight Open again. Deal of Talent Invitational. Meh. Hardys and Chris Benoit versus Eminem and MVP. They probably didn't want to have two separate matches, so they put them together. And then Boogeyman and Little Boogeyman versus Finley and Little Bastard. That's dumb. Kane versus King Booker. I don't remember that feud very well. And then you got Bobby Lashley versus Mr. Kennedy, and Bobby Lashley's the ECW champion. He's on this show. And then you've got, John Cena and Shawn Michaels. Main event versus main event, basically. Maybe this wasn't the end of the split yet. Anyway, oh yeah, it says SmackDown right here. Then you've got WrestleMania 23. Pretty solid show here. Chris Benoit and MVP work well together. Kane and Khali was horrible. Melina versus Ashley was not good. The Originals versus the New Breed. I get they're trying to get the ECW guys exposure, so I get why they did that. But Sandman couldn't wrestle. Tommy Dreamer I'm not a fan of. So RVD and Sabu were the only people that made sense there. I did like the addition of Marcus Corvon from TNA, where he was Alpha Man Monty Brown. Then you got the Money in the Bank match, which is always fun. Bobby Lashley versus Umaga. They made it feel like a huge match with hair versus hair and Stone Cold involved and all that. Batista and The Undertaker was a classic. John Cena versus Shawn Michaels was a good match, but not as good as Batista and The Undertaker. All in all, this was a pretty solid WrestleMania. Not as good as 22 and 21, but it's still good. Then you have Backlash. Now it's the end of the brand split. So you got Chris Benoit versus MVP for the US belt. Undertaker versus Batista, the rematch. Their matches were all amazing. 3-on-1 handicap for the ECW title, and this is where Vince wins the title, which is ridiculous. And then you got the Melina versus Mickie James. Pretty solid match. The Hardys versus Lance Cade and Trevor Murdoch, which were probably the best heel tag team at the point. And then Fatal 4-Way for the WWE title. Shawn Michaels, Edge, Randy Orton, and John Cena. I don't remember what led to that. But I think it was just that Randy Orton and Edge were sick of Shawn Michaels getting the shot. I'm betting it's something along those lines. Then we have Judgment Day. The Hardys versus Lance Cade and Trevor Murdoch again. John Cena and the Great Khali. John Cena got as much out of the Great Khali as he could. At least it was a watchable match. Benoit and MVP. Great matches. I believe this is right before Benoit. The whole Benoit deal. Edge versus Batista. Edge obviously is on SmackDown now. Shawn Michaels versus Randy Orton, always a classic. CM Punk versus Elijah Burke. I liked Elijah Burke. I don't think WWE used him correctly. He did really well in TNA as Pope D'Angelo De Niro. Mr. McMahon and Shane McMahon and Umaga versus Lashley again. And then you've got Ric Flair versus Carlito, who were both mad that they were left off of WrestleMania 23. Then we have One Night Stand. Another solid pay-per-view here. A lot of great matches, if I remember correctly. CM Punk, Tommy Dreamer, and Sandman versus Elijah Burke, Marcus Corvan, and Matt Striker. You know, considering, some of the people in this match, it was okay. Melina and Candice Michelle, dumb. Kane versus Mark Henry was eh. RVD versus Randy Orton was fantastic. And then you've got Edge and Batista again. Not as good as when he faced The Undertaker, but, they still had some solid matches. Then you had the Hardys versus the World's Greatest Tag Team. I like the World's Greatest Tag Team, or Team Angle, or whatever you want to call them. Very talented, very underutilized. Mr. McMahon one-on-one versus Bobby Lashley now. And then you got John Cena versus the Great Khali again. Like I said, he gets the most out of Great Khali out of anyone that I've seen as far as a Great Khali match. Then we have Vengeance, Night of Champions. I love the idea of this pay-per-view and every single title being on the line. So it makes you definitely pay attention to even the smallest ones just to see how many belts change hands. Melina and Candice Michelle. Candice Michelle couldn't wrestle. Deuce and Domino versus Superfly, Jimmy Snuka, and Sergeant Slaughter. Really? MVP versus Ric Flair. I like that. They're putting Ric Flair in a title match. He's at least, he might not be world champion material at this point, but he's definitely mid-card material. He could elevate a storyline and help elevate younger talent for sure. I don't know why they didn't do that sooner. Santino Marella and Umaga. I love Santino. Chavo versus Jimmy Wang Yang again. The Hardys versus Lance Cade and Trevor Murdoch. Johnny Nitro versus CM Punk. Great that they're giving the younger talent a push there. Edge and Batista again. I do like the WWE Championship Challenge. They all had to be former champions. And now King Booker's on Raw at this point. When he went to Raw, he wasn't the same as when he was on SmackDown. But and I forgot why Mick Foley was in this match, but probably shouldn't have been. But, it's pretty much a vehicle to get Bobby Lashley into the picture here. They drafted him off of ECW, so Raw always gets all the main eventers, it seems. They load up that and then let the other people build the younger talent. Then we've got the Great American Bash. Umaga and Jeff Hardy, great match. MVP and Matt Hardy was a solid match. Dusty Rhodes versus Randy Orton. They were trying to build Randy Orton up again to be the legend killer. Great Khali, Kane, and Batista. That was rough. They had to put Kane in there just to make it a serviceable match, I'm sure. Candice Michelle and Melina, garbage. Morrison and Punk again, pretty solid. Cena and Lashley didn't seem to have great chemistry together. I don't know if it was due to Lashley's inexperience at this point or what it was, but they just didn't seem to gel very well. And I believe this was right before Lashley left the company as well. Then we have SummerSlam and the return of Triple H. Kane and Finlay was Diva Battle Royal joke. Umaga, Mr. Kennedy, and Carlito. If Umaga didn't win this match, it was a joke. I mean, maybe they made it a triple threat just so that way Umaga couldn't win. And if he did lose, that he wouldn't actually be pinned. Rey Mysterio and Chavo Guerrero. Rey was also returning at this point. Great Khali and Batista, not as good as John Cena and Great Khali. Triple H and King Booker was a good return match for Triple H. The fans loved it. And then, of course, John Cena and Randy Orton, which is always a classic. Then we have Unforgiven. CM Punk and Elijah Burke. Again, I said I'm a huge fan of Elijah Burke. Lance Cade and Trevor Murdoch versus Paul London and Brian Kendrick. Don't remember that match, but I like the two tag teams. Candice Michelle and Beth Phoenix. I hope Beth Phoenix squashed her in that. I don't really remember either. No disqualification for Carlito. Triple H versus Carlito. I liked that whole deal. And then I loved Matt Hardy and MVP as a tag team and their competitions leading up to, being the champions and all that type of stuff. Who's the leader of the team? I loved that whole storyline. Undertaker versus Mark Henry, just a rematch from WrestleMania 22, just probably to bring the Undertaker back into the fold here. John Cena and Randy Orton, another classic. Great Khali, Rey Mysterio, and Batista instead of Kane. So that made it more watchable, as at least, Mysterio and Batista could have a good match. Then we have No Mercy, and this is the No Mercy where everyone's hurt. So they're just moving people around all over the place. I think Triple H wrestles 3 times on this card. Triple H versus Randy Orton in a last man standing match. And then you got Candice Michelle and Beth Phoenix again. Triple H versus Umaga. CM Punk versus Big Daddy V, which is Viscera. Rey Mysterio and Finlay. Batista and Great Khali, again, really awful. And then you got Randy Orton and Triple H again. So, this was... Triple H definitely earned his paycheck. I wonder if he got a huge payday compared to everyone else on this pay-per-view. Then we've got Cyber Sunday again. And again, this one was better than that last Taboo Tuesday. Mr. Kennedy versus Jeff Hardy. I believe this is right before Mr. Kennedy is going to be gone soon too here. Triple H and Umaga. Great match. MVP and Kane, not so great. Rey Mysterio and Finlay, okay. Batista and Undertaker's a classic. And with Stone Cold as the referee, people are going to love that match. Then you got CM Punk versus The Miz. And then you've got Randy Orton versus Shawn Michaels. Fans always seem to vote Shawn Michaels in on those matches, but he was never going to win the belt again. So I don't know. I don't know why they thought that. Oh, if we keep voting him in, they'll give him the belt. And then we've got Survivor Series again. Get ready for the unimpressive here. CM Punk, John Morrison, and The Miz for the ECW belt. Lance Cade and Trevor Murdoch versus Cody Rhodes and Hardcore Holly. Hornswoggle versus the Great Khali, because Hornswoggle was Vince McMahon's son. Was a ridiculous storyline. Divas match is skippable. Then you've got your random men's Survivor Series match. Randy Orton, Shawn Michaels. Again, solid match, but you knew Shawn wasn't going to win. And then Batista versus The Undertaker, always a classic. Then we had Armageddon, and this one was actually one of the better Armageddons in a while. MVP and Rey Mysterio was very good. Beth Phoenix and Mickie James was fantastic. Finlay and the Great Khali, not so great. Shawn Michaels and Mr. Kennedy was okay. CM Punk and Kane versus Big Daddy V and Mark Henry. They were just trying to get the ECW guys on here. Triple H and Jeff Hardy was a fantastic match. The crowd was so into it. And when Jeff Hardy won, oh man, the place went bonkers. Batista versus Edge versus Undertaker was a great match. And Randy Orton versus the returning Chris Jericho was a fantastic match. And then we've got the Royal Rumble. This is where I believe Mike Adamle called Jeff Hardy Jeff Harvey. But you got the Royal Rumble match, which was the return of John Cena. Randy Orton versus Jeff Hardy after Jeff Hardy won the match at Armageddon. And it was a great match, too. These two, Jeff Hardy proved that he deserved to be there. Edge versus Mysterio was a classic. Chris Jericho versus JBL was not a classic. Ric Flair and MVP was very solid. Then we've got No Way Out, and this was a solid card right here. Chavo versus CM Punk for the ECW belt was great. SmackDown World Elimination Chamber match was fantastic. Ric Flair versus Mr. Kennedy. This is where they were doing the whole Ric Flair loses a match, he's fired, angle. Carried on for a few months before he retired at WrestleMania. Then you, of course, all the main event talents on Raw, so you got a huge stacked Elimination Chamber match for that. Plus, you have Edge versus Mysterio and John Cena versus Orton for the belts. I mean, the main event picture was so stacked. I loved this period in time in WWE from 2002 up to this point here. Fantastic. Then we've got probably one of my favorite WrestleManias of all time right here. Edge versus The Undertaker was just wow. Big Show and Floyd Mayweather was even entertaining. Randy Orton, Triple H, and Cena were great. The Divas match was dumb. Ric Flair and Shawn Michaels was a classic. Sad to see Ric Flair go. Chavo and Kane was even pretty solid. Batista and Umaga were good. Money in the Bank, always great. But the JBL and Finlay was ridiculous. But I love this WrestleMania. And then finally we have Backlash. Randy Orton, John Cena, Triple H, and JBL in a four-way match. They never seemed to know what to do after WrestleMania, so they were just kind of globbing stuff together. Undertaker and Edge in a rematch. Not as great as Batista, but still. Diva match was a joke. Shawn Michaels versus Batista with Chris Jericho. These pay-per-views with those three, they always seem to rotate opponents for a few months, and I didn't get that. Big Show and Khali was awful. Kane and Chavo was okay. MVP and Matt Hardy was pretty solid. But that will do it for this shelf of my wrestling collection. If you like content like this, please like and subscribe. Your support is much appreciated. I'm also on Letterboxd. I have a link over in the description of my channel. Otherwise, until next time, guys.